What's up, guys? This is Pete Characters Clerk for runatOnce.com, and this is episode number 3 of From the Ground Up, When Someone Limps. Today, we're going to discuss situations where we have the chance to raise pre-flop, but in this case, it's not been folded to us. There has been one or more limpers in the pot, which dramatically changes the situation. I'm going to look at this spot a little bit differently than how I looked at opening, and here's the first thing to say. This time, our strategy is going to change in a few ways. The situation is going to be a lot more dynamic now. How many limpers were there? What are the stack sizes of the limpers? How do they react to raises? Do they limp call, limp fold, or is that guy in the pot who likes to limp and then shove? So, given all these dynamic factors, including the opponents behind us and their 3-bet tendencies, their calling tendencies, that sort of thing, whether we want to isolate or not is going to be dependent on some very exact factors present in the spot, and for that reason we're going to look at this on a hand-by-hand basis. That means that instead of building isolation, or ISO as it's sometimes called, charts or ranges, we're actually going to just look at a hand in and of its own merit and decide if that hand is good enough to isolate with, whether it should just be limped behind or whether we should call, or whether we should fold, sorry. And while I say that we are going to look at a hand on an individual basis, we should also be aware that if in the long term we are isolating limpers with too wide of a range for too large of a sizing, we're going to open ourselves up to getting 3-bet very uncomfortably by the players behind us. And if they are active or tough regulars, we could find out that even though our raises are profitable against a limper, the regs are interfering too often and again denying us our equity, which is the worst thing that can happen in no limit hold'em, as we keep saying. So we can also consider limping behind here. This is one of our options, but we're not going to open limp. So when we're looking at the last installment on open raising, we weren't going to start limping as the first player into the pot. The reason that we can limp behind is that we're already entering the kind of climate where we're going to have a multi-way situation that's not being raised, and that's very good for a certain breed of hands. What breed? That's right, the implied odds hands, things like pocket fours, 5-4 suited, 8-6 suited, ace-3 suited. In certain situations, you will want to raise these hands to isolate. In others, you won't. And we're going to examine 3 factors today that guide us towards that decision. Do we isolate? Do we call? Or do we simply fold because we believe there's no profitable way of us entering the pot? Usually, when someone limps, our ranges will tighten somewhat compared to what they were when we are open raising. This isn't always the case. And there are times when a very bad player's presence can actually cause us to raise the button wider than we would if that player was not in the pot. Say we have someone with a 100% VPIP, which is a voluntarily put money in pot. That's somebody who plays every single hand literally. If this player limps a cutoff and plays very, very badly, we might isolate 80% on the button now instead of the token 50 or 55%, depending on what we think the players behind us will let us away with. There are 3 relevant factors for isolating. This is the way I teach this spot, and I think it's by far the most successful way of doing it. There's some other little factors here, but there are 3 things that if you examine them each time, you will get to the right decision here as to whether or not to isolate. Once you've decided whether or not you want to raise to isolate the limper, and if you say no, you then need to decide, is your hand good enough to call for implied odds and get into a multi-way pot, or is it simply a hand that should be folded? The first factor that we always want to consider is what I call our frequent strength. This is a bit like just saying hand strength, but the difference between hand strength and frequent strength is that frequent strength is specific. It's about being often able to make a strong hand on the flop. So what hands do you flop a lot of the time in a limit hold'em that are strong hands? Top pairs, flush draws, pair plus draw, etc. So something like king queen off will have a lot of frequent strength, whereas something like pocket threes or king 3 suited will have a lot less. A small suited connector or offsuit connector will have very little, because while it can sometimes improve through a very, very good hand, most of the time, frequently, it will have nothing. So frequent strength is about being able to make that top pair that's very often the best hand. It's important because, as we're about to see, when the next factor, which is fold equity, is against us and we don't have a lot of fold equity, meaning we can't make all of our opponents fold and thereby win the pot by the flop or earlier, then we need the frequent strength. So this is a bit like an inversely proportionate situation. The more of one of these you have, the less of the other you need. If you have a lot of frequent strength, you don't need as much fold equity. If you have ace king, you don't care how often they're folding because you don't need any fold equity. We need to be clear about why we're raising. If we're raising with a very strong hand with a lot of frequent strength, we don't need fold equity. On the other hand, if we have a lot of fold equity and we think that there's just one limper in this spot who is going to be folding very often and the blinds are tight and we're on the button, we can isolate that player, c-bet the flop, and win with a very high frequency. We don't need a lot of frequent strength. Maybe 8-6 off is a good enough hand to do that with in extreme cases. If these two main factors are close, the third factor I want you guys to think about is position. Position is an overarching kind of all singing, all dancing EV creator. When you're in position, you will necessarily have way more EV than when you're out of it. This is basically, as long as the stacks are reasonably deep and there's still some play left in the hand, again, much like EV and equity come apart when there's a lot of play left in the hand, the importance of position actually becomes a closer thing to EV. It starts to matter with your EV a lot more. So when you're in position, you would rather there's some money left behind to actually use that position with your decision making. The idea is that in position, obviously, we act last, we get information, we can ensure that a bet goes in on a certain street or ensure that it doesn't if our opponent checks to us. We get checked to more often because of our opponent's disadvantages. We don't face as much pressure. We do a better job of value betting because we can always make sure that money goes in. We stop our opponent pot controlling, just all kinds of things. Position will increase the EV of any situation where there's significant play left in the hand, including this one, isolating. It's a bit of a tiebreaker. It does matter. I'd say the first two are the more concrete reasons though. Let's practice this. Example 1, we're on the button with pocket fours. This is a hand that is not great with frequent strength. We'll come to that in a second though. We have a limp from a loose recreational, a limp from a tight recreational. We have a station recreational, which stands for calling station, which means the player does not like to fold. And needless to say, we'll be getting involved very often in a multi-way pot here, even if we raise. If that wasn't bad enough, we have an aggressive reg who's going to choose to play a lot of his big cards with a 3-bet here, not by calling. And again, he's going to do that to deny equity to his opponents, which is correct. And we are going to struggle to profit by raising this hand, it looks like on the face of it. We can see that in more detail by weighing up the factors here. Frequent strength is bad. If you flop a set, you have a huge hand. You don't do that frequently, and that's why frequent strength is not high here. Fold equity is non-existent. I mean, you have even less because the amount of the time that you can pick this pot up unimproved by c-betting the flop is very low because firstly, a lot of players are going to go to the flop here. On average, you're going to play in a 2-3, probably a 3 or 4-way pot more than a 2-way pot. So because of that, it's going to be very difficult to get a c-bet through, particularly with a hand that flops very badly when it doesn't flop a set. This hand has rare strength if such a thing exists, not frequent strength. If a hand is only rarely going to be good, and you don't have the fold equity to push people out of the pot, you're better off keeping your investment to a minimum. So although your position is good here, the other factors are so bad that this looks like calling is going to be the best play. Implied odds are fantastic, but remember, as we saw previously, implied odds are a ratio of what you're investing to what you might win on average if you get there. The smaller the investment, the better. As I said in episode 1, you wouldn't go and buy a lottery ticket for $1,000. Your investment is important, not just your payout. Keep the investment small here and you'll improve your implied odds. Don't isolate this hand in this situation. Completely different spot. Weak recreational. This means this guy is not fighting for pots. He's giving up on pots. He's playing fit or fold. Based on that, we suddenly think that our fold equity is a lot better. But not just based on that. We also have a net at the table here, which means a very tight player. If I say net in this series, I'm talking about someone who is so tight that it's almost absurd. And then a tight reg who's too much on the tight side, maybe not a horrible player, but definitely a bit too tight. So we get to realize our equity here very often because we don't get 3-bet much by these guys in the blinds. The weak recreational doesn't limp raise much. He usually limp folds or limp calls and folds flop. So overall, our frequent strength is still low here. Maybe it's a bit better than with fours because we can at least flop draws and, second pairs and stuff like that a bit more easily, and sometimes top pair with this hand. So I'd say this hand has more frequent strength than pocket fours, but not a great deal. Fold equity, however, is fantastic and position is great as well. So you can see here by weighing up our 3 factors, this looks like a very comfortable ISO raise. We're going to go ahead and raise this hand. I'd recommend making it about 8 blue chips, 4 big blinds, because you do want to discourage action. When you're isolating, you want to make your sizing a bit bigger than if you were opening. If you're opening, you can go 2.5x here on the button, no problem. If you're isolating, however, you're going to want to charge people a bit more. Do be careful though, if you have guys behind you who are 3-betting a lot, drop that down to 3x, don't go 4x, because you're going to end up having to fold to that 3-bet sometimes. And if you create too large of a pot, you'll make it unprofitable for you to defend against the 3-bet often, because there won't be enough play left in the stack for you to call as profitably. So keep your sizing smaller against, aggressive regs in the blinds, but on a table like this where we're not worried about being persecuted after we use a big sizing, we can go for even 5x if we think that the weak recreational is calling it, and then, folding on the flop, we might want to go even bigger than 4x there, maybe 5x. So last example we're going to look at today, I think. Maybe I made another one after this, who knows? I went on a spree of making these PowerPoints. We'll find out. So in the small blind here with King Jack offsuit, and the first notable thing is that the position is bad. We have a weak recreational, again, the kind of guy that we can win a lot of pots from through fold equity, through making him fold. He limps the button, again, a tight player behind us who, although isn't described as a nit, is still playing too tight, and it's probably not. 3-betting enough is probably folding too many hands, not even getting involved in enough multi-way pots. So with this hand, we can say frequent strength is great. We have 2 very big cards. We can make straights with this hand, but more importantly, we can make the best 2 pairs, the best trips, the best kicker with our trips, the best top pair with a good kicker kind of hand that's going to do very well at getting value post flop. So we don't need a lot of fold equity here. We do have some as well. Even though we're out of position, we can still make this player fold. We have a tight guy behind us. Picking this pot up by the flop is going to be a very distinct possibility at high frequency. So raising this hand is looking good. Position's bad, but it's not bad enough to deter us. The frequent strength and likely heads up nature of this pot make up for the poor position. We should isolate. Again, going 4 big blinds, you could even go 5. It depends on the situation. I wouldn't go 3 here. Out of position, you'd like to add a little bit to the ISO just to punish players for realizing their implied odds in position. In position, remember, they get more implied odds. They need less in the way of pot odds to continue, and they're going to be playing more hands, so punish them for that by compensating with a big hand like this that's a favorite by making it bigger. And your skill advantage will shine through here. You're a regular, you're watching this series, you're serious about your game. You can beat a weak recreational after the flop with these cards any day. So definitely want to make an ISO here. That was the last example, as I suspected. So thanks for watching again, guys. Hope you're enjoying the series so far. I'm going to record another couple of episodes today, and by the time you're watching this, all 30 will be good to go. So hope you're enjoying making your way through it. Next time, we are going to be looking at episode number 4, which is going to be about calling an open in position. So the other side of the coin from being the opener. This has been Pete, Characters Clark for runatOnce.com, and I will see you guys on the next video. Bye-bye for now.